So we're logged in and we're able to use Sonar, but what about our employees? So to get them logged in, what we need is some roles and some users. And a role is going to define the permissions that each user has, and then the users themselves will define the employees and what they're able to do. So if you click on System and under Access, we can see roles and users. We're going to start by creating a role. And there's two roles built into Sonar by default: Super Admin, which can always do absolutely everything, and Read Only, which is only going to allow people to view data and not manipulate it. So those are generally too permissive and not permissive enough for most general employees. So we're going to need to make some ourselves. So I'm going to click Create Role up at the top left here. And let's make a role. Let's imagine we need a role for customer support. So I'm going to call my role Customer Support, and then we can go down through all of the individual permissions here and pick the ones that are going to be applicable. So there's the permission name. Most of them have read, create, update, and delete as options. There's also some Boolean permissions down at the bottom where they're just on or off, and we'll go through those in a minute, but let's start with these read, create, update, delete permissions up here. So there's a section. There's going to be a description down here that gives you some feedback on what the role does, and then there's the individual permissions to select within here. So for customer support, I'm going to give them full access to accounts. It does note here that some account functions are restricted unless account CPU is provided. So in a lot of parts of Sonar, we have the base permissions that are create, read, update, and delete. And then there's a higher level, which is a super user for that area. So for example, in accounts, unless you're a super user, you can't do things like manipulate billing parameters. You can't delete the account itself. Those kinds of things where you want to impose specific business rules. For example, you probably don't want general customer support people changing people's bill days. That's held under the account super user permission, and so these general permissions are going to relate to creating an account itself, looking at an account, making a payment, that kind of thing. Let's go down and take a look at a couple of others. This allows access to items under the financial menu other than invoice batching and batch payment entry, so I can look under financial and see what's there. You know, I probably don't want my customer support people changing my credit card processor, messing with services and that kind of thing, so I wouldn't give them that. And you can just sort of keep scrolling down here and looking at what all these different things do and think about what you might want to give them. For example, I probably do want my customer support people to get into the ticketing system, so I'm going to give them that. But I'm not sure anything else here really makes sense. Maybe I want them to see the map, that kind of thing. So I'm going to go ahead and create that role. So now I have a customer support role where I've defined some permissions that I want users to have. So now let's go back into System and look at the other options we have there. We have users and password requirements. Let's jump into users first. So here's my admin user I'm logged in as. Let's go ahead and create another user, which is going to be one of my employees. So I'm going to say his name's John Doe. There's an option here for a public name, and the difference between a name and a public name is inside Sonar, we would always show the name. But if this user communicates with a customer in some way, like through a ticket, you have an option to use their public name there instead. So maybe I don't want them to see his whole name. Maybe I want him to be John D publicly, or maybe even just John. Username can be anything. I'm just going to make it John to match his name. I'm going to put in his email address. You can put in a mobile phone number here, and we'll delve into this a little later, but when the notifications get displayed up in the menu here, you're going to have an option as well for these notifications to go out as an email and or a text message. And so if I want text message notifications, I need a mobile number here. I'm going to leave this blank for now. Put in an initial password, and then I pick their initial role. So I'm going to pick my customer support role here that I made, and I'm going to go ahead and create this user. Now, by default, when this user first logs in, they're going to log in with that password we just set, but they're going to get forced to change their password right away, so you don't need to worry too much about how weak or strong that password is. In relation to the password, one other thing we want to look at under Access is our password requirements. And we could set quite a lot of different values here, so we can set a minimum length for a password. I can make this longer or shorter. We can require that there's at least an uppercase and lowercase character and that kind of thing. We can also use this minimum password strength library. So if you click on this Dropbox link, there's an explanation here of how this works, but rather than having these sort of basic requirements here where you know, I could turn these on, right? But someone could still make a password where it was password with a capital P and an exclamation mark on the end. That's really still not a very strong password. We can set this here to one of these options, and this is going to actually look at the password itself and use some logic to try and determine if it's a strong password or not. So for example, even though password with a capital P and an exclamation at the end would pass these requirements, it would fail on this one because it would see it's a common dictionary word and it's not very complex. So we can use a combination of these things to impose strict password policy on our users. So I'm going to go ahead and save this. Okay, so we've gone through user creation and role creation. You can now step through and make all the roles that you think are applicable. And one other thing to note that I didn't bring up is there is documentation on the side of every page here under Docs. So if there's anything that I've skimmed over a little bit and you want to read in more detail, you can always go to the page, for example, a roles page, and open up the docs on the side here and take a look at them. You can also click this small icon here with the blue square with the arrow coming out of it, open this in another page, and be able to read these on a bigger screen.